My heartfelt and sincere wishes for a Kasiva v'Chasima Tova, a year of health, happiness, a year of great strides in Avodas Hashem. In the yeshiva, we are celebrating our 50th year, and that is no small achievement. And I'm very nostalgic because I remember Rav Lichtenstein's Sicha during the 50th year of the State of Israel, about 20 years ago. And Rav Lichtenstein always processed events in general, and in particular life in Israel, through the lens of halachic conventions and halachic institutions. In this respect, it was a little bit different from some of the other messages we heard from some of the other Rabbeim, and Rav Amital in particular, who would quote psukim from Tanakh, prophetic forecasts, and try to associate current events with ancient prophecies. Rav Lichtenstein would employ halachic terminology and halachic tools as part of his brisker positioning and his brisker processing and experience. And I remember, during the 50th year, around 20 years ago, Rav Lichtenstein employed the experience of Yovel as a metaphor for assessing our growth as a yeshiva and the state of Israel in particular. So in that spirit, I'm reminded of that Sicha, and during the 50th year of our yeshiva, as this year is about to begin, not the 50th year of the state of Israel, I also want to try to employ Yovel as a chance to assess as well as gain some perspective on where we're headed as a yeshiva. Yovel is comprised of three constituent mitzvos. One mitzvah is Tekiyah Shofar on Yom Kippur and Beis Din. Taviru Shofar b'chol artzachem. In fact, this is a more explicit mention of Shofar than Rosh Hashanah. In Rosh Hashanah and Parshas Emor, Parshas Pinchas, the image of the Shofar is muted. In Parshas Bahar, Shofar comes to the fore. Taviru Shofar b'chol artzachem. The second component of Yovel is releasing and emancipating slaves. The third component is the reparation of lands, of steachusa, of lands which belong to families which have been sold temporarily based on economic need. These three are metaphors for what our yeshiva has accomplished as an institution, as Talmidim of the yeshiva, and how we have to reset our expectations and our ambitions now that we are experiencing Be'ezras Hashem this 50th year celebration. We're not here to celebrate merely and to pat ourselves on the back, but to remind ourselves of our mission and to redouble our efforts in attaining some of our goals. The shofar calls people to higher ground. The yeshiva has a message, and this message has reverberated throughout 50 years on many different continents. The return to Eretz Yisrael, the importance of settlement, the primacy of Gemara learning, the renaissance of Tanakh learning, the notion that sophisticated thinking does not have to be associated with a dilution of passion, but can increase passion. A view of the world is favorable, not a suspicious view of the world is full of goblins and demons. Many different messages, and it calls people to higher ground, and it's imperative upon us to remind ourselves of those messages and to continue to broadcast those messages in our private lives, in our interactions with others, to be proud that we received this legacy and we received these ideas that have changed our lives and hopefully will continue to make a major impact across the world in many, many Jewish communities. So the shofar has to be sounded, and we have to remind ourselves of what our shofar has been and how we can continue to sound that shofar. I want to skip to the return of lands. Returning lands reminds ourselves that legacy, tradition is important and imperative to our religious identity. And I think part of what makes the message of the yeshiva so compelling is that on the one hand, the yeshiva is progressive and modern and adaptive, but it's deeply, deeply rooted in traditionalism. And our change always has to be conceived and imagined from within rather than breaking down institutions and conventions to refresh them. And I think Rav Amital and Rav Lichtenstein, each in their own way, were traditionalists who understood the need for adaptation and for modification. But it's also a sense of continuity, transgenerational continuity. This land belonged to my grandparents and belonged to their grandparents, and even though it may have been sold temporarily for economic pressures and exigencies, that land has to return because it belongs to the family. Baruch Hashem, we're at the stage where our yeshiva has begun to shape families, and 2 and 3 generations of families. At this point in yeshiva, it's probably, you'd have to do a count, but it's probably close to 30 to 40% of the boys currently learning in yeshiva are children of, in some cases grandchildren of, brothers of, and Baruch Hashem is something we should be proud of, that this yeshiva, it's not just a random circumstance that brothers are returning, but the yeshiva's message, being that it's an adult message, And being that it's not just the yeshiva for 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds, but it's the yeshiva that people return to and draw from at every stage of their life, it has, Baruch Hashem, and should continue to shape families. So many people speak about having never been in the yeshiva. I heard so many stories about Rav Lichtenstein, so many stories about Rav Amital. I heard these nigunim on Rosh Hashanah, the baby crying story. And people who never step foot in this yeshiva are deeply, deeply affiliated with the aspirations and the agenda of this yeshiva, because it has the impact not just on Talmidim for a year or two, or 5 years, or 6 years when they're in the study hall in the Beis Medrash, but it can shape families and family life. And the Stei Achuza and the return of fields reminds us of the impact of family life and how we want to try as a yeshiva, not just to shape the imagination of a 19-year-old, but to help families continue to grow as part of their avodas Hashem. Shiluach Avadim. Shiluach Avadim literally means to free slaves, but in a figurative sense it means to dispatch slaves. And the reason that slaves are freed is because no man should ever be enslaved to another man. As the Torah writes, Ki avadai heim, v'lo avadim la'avadim. Our true identity as avadim is to be Avdei Hashem, not to be enslaved to any social fads, not to be enslaved to any outdated conventions. Rav Lichtenstein on his kever, many of you have visited the kever, asked that there be only 2 words on the kever, Oved Hashem. And as much as the yeshiva strives to articulate a sophisticated message that how to view our return to Israel, what role of Tanakh, the importance of sophistication, the way we view our broader world and communal responsibilities, the core, to see yourself as an Oved Hashem, to see yourself as an Eved Hashem. And that's why no one can be enslaved or indentured to another human being for more than 6 years. And even if they have committed themselves to a more longer term through Ritzuas HaOzen, because they wanted to stay, Yovel releases all slaves, Ki avadai heim v'lo avadim la'avadim. So none of us are avadim, and none of us are going to live through the experience of release on Yovel. But the undercurrent, to see yourself as an Oved Hashem, is something that each individual has to remind themselves, without that core, all the messages of yeshiva can be very, very attenuated. If the core of Avodas Hashem remains intact, then all those messages and all those larger, very ambitious platforms simply create a greater depth and profundity. Mazel tov to our yeshiva, and everyone should have a year of nachas, Avodas Hashem, health, and happiness.